a couple of short stories about Brazil as well as Venezuela. There is this bizarre obsession among media figures the world over with image, country's image. Okay, they look at the quote unquote image of a country like, let's say Denmark, happy people. I think Denmark leads the world in the happiness index. And typically, what they will do with that image is project it and say, well, that's the model country that we should aspire to be, without trying to remember that Denmark, it has a different climate than country B. Let's say the other country. Can Somalia, for example, ever hope to be the same as Denmark? Not really, because their economies and their food, their diets are different. Obviously, there are different health problems in Somalia than there are in Denmark, by and large. If you look at a population, no two populations of two countries are exactly the same. You can try to compare the two and find ones that are comparable on one level, but in the end, you're really it's not easy. So when media outfits try to say, well, a country's image is suffering because of this person or that person or whatever, I tend to think that what they're really talking about is this country's ability to to satisfy the criteria that the media is setting for it, or that the world's elite intellectuals are setting for it. The Davos Forum. This is kind of where I get into Steve Bannon territory, and I think it's time we finally were able to assess really what his words mean. Steve Bannon's philosophy, if you don't buy into the media smear jobs against him, which I think they give him too much credit for what he's doing around the world. Some of the things that he's active in terms of populism would be happening anyway without him, because eventually Italy was going to elect a nationalist and anti-immigration leader like the guy that they have now, whose name is Salvini, I think. Salvini, I think, is the deputy prime minister. That would have happened. You don't need Steve Bannon to do that. So Steve Bannon's philosophy is that you have these corporatized elites who go to these very cushy events all around the world, especially in Switzerland. The Davos Forum is the most famous one, where people who have had the best education and the best connections to wealth and the best connections to power go to pontificate about where they think that the world is going in terms of any number of topics, whether it's health or money or industries or new energy, for example, renewable energy, things like that. That is Steve Bannon's criticism of the elite, and he claims that their perception of the world is completely the opposite of the perception of people in rural Croatia, or the people who live in the slums of Rio in this case. So then you get this article, which is a commentary column in Reuters, which I didn't even know that they have that, where this guy, Dom Phillips, says Bolsonaro may bring tragedy to Brazil. His supporters don't care. Well, why do you care, if I might ask? Are you the issue that I have is that you can criticize leaders, but when you criticize their voters, exactly what is it that you want? If you're not from a certain place and you don't have the right to vote there, then maybe you should respect the will of other people. When Mexico voted for Lopez Obrador, who is a far left radical, I said I wasn't personally optimistic at the time, but you still have to accept that it's Mexicans' choice who's going to be their next president, even if it's somebody that may have adverse effects on the economy. And you still have to give that person a chance, because then they have the public mandate. So it says that he's a Brazil-based journalist writing as a columnist for Reuters. And he says, concerning the voters, they are unconcerned by Bolsonaro's notorious racist, homophobic, and sexist comments declaring that homosexuality could be beaten out of children, that refugees were the scum of the earth, and that women should get paid less than men. They either ignore or condone his support for the military dictatorship that ran Brazil from 1964 to 1985, torturing and executing opponents, that he wants Brazil out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and supports economic exploitation, not environmental protection in the Amazon rainforest, barely registered. But this all creates a deep sense of alarm abroad. Now, I'll say this. I've been very supportive of certain things that Bolsonaro has said, but yes, if he's going into the rainforest and doing a lot of logging and destroying habitats, yeah, I personally don't like that. I think it's the wrong way to go. I'm wondering exactly how it is that he would be different from Brazil's past governments. Illegal logging and legal logging is happening in the Amazon rainforest, despite everything that people will tell you. It is happening, and these people who claim, oh, it would be the worst thing in the world if Bolsonaro... No, it would happen the same way that it's happening now. You're not going to get an increase in it, and to pretend that it's not happening now is simply whitewashing. It's whitewashing reality. It's the same issue as what's been happening here in the States with regards to the quote-unquote separation of families at the border. And that was happening already here in the U.S., and people didn't care when President Obama and President Bush and President Clinton were doing it. And now suddenly it has become a human rights issue suddenly. No, it's a complete charade that people suddenly care about it. Among the tens of millions of rich and poor Brazilians now backing Bolsonaro, many previously voted for two-time leftist president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, or Lula. Others see Bolsonaro as the least worst option to Lula and his Workers' Party, which was tainted by the enormous graft scandal unveiled while his successor Dilma Rousseff was in power and the debilitating recession that followed. Bolsonaro supporters crow over the 12-year prison sentence Lula is serving for graft and money laundering. Bolsonaro's traditional moralist pro-family position appeals in this profoundly conservative Roman Catholic country with its booming evangelical Christian population. Influential televangelists, police officers, and military personnel support him. Voters are subject to a relentless barrage of propaganda and downright lies from Bolsonaro's supporters on social media and the WhatsApp groups that big Brazilian families use to keep in touch. So this is the big bullshit here. For many of us, we're used to Facebook and whatever Twitter being blamed for the spread of Russian propaganda during the 2016 election. WhatsApp. When you use WhatsApp, and probably plenty of you have tried, those of you that watch this channel and the streams, WhatsApp is a messaging device. So they're trying to say, well, people sending each other messages with news stories, they're the ones who are to blame for this. This is unacceptable. We have to limit the way that people share information with each other. That's not even news. That's not even news. If I hear something about let's say, what are they going to say now? That it's like social media is harmful. And by the way, WhatsApp technically isn't social media because it's a messaging service. You can decide to send the message to one person, or you can decide to send the message to 30 people through a group, a WhatsApp group. That's technically social media, but it could just as well be, a personal messaging app like SMS text, right? So if people were doing it that way through SMS or through Facebook Messenger, then you're basically saying the government has the right to police gossip. Okay, if you tell somebody that you think their wife's been cheating on them, the government can then say, no, that's harmful dissemination of information. No, that's wrong. That it's the same exact template, and this is why these elites, they suddenly believe, Bolsonaro is the real harmful person here. No, this is ridiculous. Some of the more extreme among Bolsonaro's supporters have even accused Haddad and his party of promoting incest and sexualizing children in a country with high cell phone use where a third of the population is functionally illiterate. Some of these slanders stick. That's another insult. Functionally illiterate. Yes, there are a lot of people in Brazil that have really, they don't have a good education system in parts of Brazil. Many large parts of Brazil have very poor education systems. And therefore, the question would be, if the Workers' Party has been in power for 16 years, why is it that a third of the population continues to be functionally illiterate? Why should those people vote for the Workers' Party if the Workers' Party for the past 16 years was in charge of the education of the people, and you're saying that a third of them are still functionally illiterate? The propaganda all pushes the same argument. The Bolsonaro is the savior who will rescue the fatherland from ruin, reverse moral decay, save Christianity and the traditional heterosexual family, and halt an irreversible slide into Venezuela-style collapse. And after tens of thousands of women demonstrate against Bolsonaro under the slogan, Ele no, not him, Carlos Bolsonaro, one of the candidates' lawmaker's son, tweeted a photo of a man being tortured in a plastic bag, captioned with the same phrase. The Workers' Party has aided its own humiliation with an ineffectual campaign, and its followers have spread their fair share of false news and lies. So then, if that's the truth, if the Workers' Party is just as, it's done their own fair share, as he says, of false news and lies, then wouldn't you be able to say that Haddad would also be ruining Brazil? Because it's the same thing. Haddad, an academic who served as mayor of Sao Paulo and Lula's education minister, became his last-minute candidate when a court ruled Lula out. The party has refused to admit any involvement in graft, denies any culpability for the recession, and officially supports oppressive leftist regimes in Venezuela and Nicaragua. So there's a refugee crisis that's spilling into northern Brazil from Venezuela, and the Workers' Party candidate is still supporting the Venezuelan government, the one that's driving these refugees out with their ridiculously idiotic economic policies. Sid Gomes, brother of Ciro Gomes, a leftist candidate who came third in the first round of voting, laid into a PT meeting last week. You have to apologize, he told militants in a speech. You are going to lose badly. Video of the speech went straight into a Bolsonaro campaign commercial, fueling more self-righteousness and confirming the conviction that the man's supporters call legend has come to save Brazil from the decadent communist hordes. In a speech on Sunday delivered by video link to thousands of supporters gathered in Sao Paulo, Bolsonaro threatened his Workers' Party rivals with prison or exile. These red marginals will be banned from our fatherland, he said. It will be a cleansing never seen before in Brazilian history. So what I understand, okay, is that there are elements. He wasn't even referring to the Workers' Party. He was referring to the fact that there are left-wing militias in Brazil and in parts of the rural areas especially that harass people all the time. And basically they're extortion gangs with kind of a Marxist, cosmetic Marxist affiliations. They're not actually political. And that's who he was threatening. He wasn't threatening the Workers' Party, per se. For Bolsonaro's more passionate supporters, the candidate can do no wrong. When the economists called him a menace who would make a disastrous president, they were incensed. When the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan said that Bolsonaro sounded like their kind of guy, they attacked a fake narrative. Bolsonaro rejected the endorsement, tweeting that he refused any support coming from supremacist groups. When FC Barcelona, one of the world's most successful soccer clubs, distanced itself from former player and Brazilian soccer star Ronaldinho over his support of Bolsonaro, his endorsement of Bolsonaro, they simply ignored it. And that's a story I covered. If a sports team is making a political statement, in my opinion, people can take it one way or another. They can say, fuck the sports team. We're going to support whatever position they want. We shouldn't be captive to the political opinions of celebrities or organizations that claim to represent other people. Okay? And when reports of dozens of attacks, including 2 murders by Bolsonaro supporters on leftists, women reporters, and LGBT people emerged, they rubbished them as leftist lies. So I'm going to I'm gonna cut this short. I don't think that it's complete bullshit here. Okay, the only part that I would say is a real concern to me is Bolsonaro's policy with regards to wildlife in the rainforest and mining and everything. I am not a supporter of this right-wing conservative policy of using natural resources to the fullest extent possible. I believe in the fact that once you do that, you end up making the earth less habitable. You make it more dangerous for the common people. So, and that's why I'll criticize Bolsonaro if he does that. If you have stories to send me regarding that, I'm willing to cover them and I'll look them up as well. But in Venezuela, this is already an issue. It says a union has accused PDVSA for problems with the refinery. So I said earlier that this would be about both Brazil and Venezuela. This is not a huge story, but Curaçao is a Dutch colony that's off the coast of Venezuela. It's part of the same chain of islands as Aruba, if you know about that. Remember, was it Natalie Holloway was the woman murdered there a few years back, but Curaçao is a different part of that, of the Netherlands Antilles, as they're called. So this is from Willemstad. All the focus is now on the Curaçao refining utilities for the problems with the refinery, but according to the SDK Union, CRU is not the problem. The problem is the Venezuelan state oil company, PDVSA. CRU is responsible for the supply of electricity, steam, water, and air pressure for the Isla refinery, which is leased and operated by PDVSA. According to Chairman Adela Job Dirks of the SDK Union, CRU has its problems, but those problems are caused by the very inferior quality of asphalt provided by Isla or PDVSA, and which affects the refinery's boilers. She repeats what Director Roderick van Quartel of the public company Refineria de Corzu, landlord of PDVSA and responsible for CRU, said on Sunday, namely that CRU is suffering considerable damage to a boiler and pipelines as a result of the very poor asphalt that serves as fuel for the plant. The repair work is much larger and therefore takes a lot longer than usual. But CRU is not the problem of the virtually empty refinery, says Job Dirks and Vice Chairman Norberto Mott. Certainly not the only problem. Isla is having serious problems with PDVSA, which also produces less and less output in its own country. There haven't been any oil tankers in the harbor for months. So this is what I have an issue with, that people are obsessing now that Bolsonaro might take Brazil back into a darker time in the 70s and 80s. But they don't care. They really don't care that what's happening now in Venezuela and what could be happening in Nicaragua increasingly is much worse than what happened in Brazil in the 70s and 80s. Yes, I would say a military dictatorship of the right-wing variety is not a desirable type of government for the reasons I was talking about, including defense of the environment, including also transparency of the government, rooting out corruption. Those types of regimes don't really fight corruption. They end up having their own form of it. But you're talking about a country that has this massive supply of oil, Venezuela, and they've basically destroyed their own system, and they blame it on sanctions, they blame it on an economic war. It doesn't matter how many excuses you have. You manage the oil industry, and you're basically running it into the ground. And now there's effects that are transcending just Venezuela. This is Curaçao, which isn't even part of Venezuela. It's a trading part of Venezuela, and Venezuela's own misery is being radiated throughout the surrounding countries of Latin America. So I think that that's the important story here. I think that if Brazil, which I think will elect Bolsonaro, if they do so, I think that will be the beginning of a cosmic shift in Latin America going forward. And I'm hoping that it will see the return of competent government to Latin America, even if Bolsonaro himself, he doesn't live up to people's expectations. That's about it. Please like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the second channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds. and comment when it uploads.